Please do take your seats, and Sharon is going to come and read our Bible reading for us this morning. Thank you.
Luke chapter 12, verse 35 to 45 to 48. Of all the possessions but posted servants say to himself, my master is talking a long time. What? This side. Oh. Dear dressed, ready for servants, and keep your lamp burning like a servant, waiting for their master to return from wedding bouquet, so that they had come to knots, they can immediately open the door for him. But it will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching them. He comes truly, I tell you, you will deserve himself to serve. You will then reclaim that the table will come and wait for them. It will be good for those servants who master friends and then ready, even if he comes in the middle of the night towards daybreak. But understanding this, if the owner of the house had known at that hour the theft was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. 41. Peter asked the Lord, you are telling this proudly, as everyone? And the Lord answered, those in faith and with wise manger, with whom master puts his chance of servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time. It will be good for their servants, whom the master finds doing so when he returns. Truly I tell you, you will put them in charge of all the possessions. But the event says to himself, my master is taking a long time in coming, and he begs them to beat the other servants, both men and women, and eat at the drink and get drunk. 48. But the ones who does not know, does things deserving punishment, will be beaten with a few blows from everyone who has been given much will be demanded from those ones who has been entrusted to much more will be asked. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Sharon. That was really helpful. It might be good, actually. I haven't got a slideshow this week, so maybe we'll keep some of the words up on the screen. Let's start with the first section, shall we? Be dressed, ready for service. Be dressed, ready for service. I can imagine the scene in many of our homes, perhaps right now as we get towards the end of term, perhaps in weeks and months and years gone by for some of us. Imagine it's 7 o'clock, 7:30, whatever it is. It's a Tuesday morning. There are adults who need to get to work. There are children to get to school, and there's much muttering and moaning. I need to use the bathroom. Who's eaten all the Cheerios? Where's my PE kit? Any of that sound familiar? Any other favourites for a morning rush?
I don't want to go to school.
And you're a teacher, yes. Eventually, half-dressed children are chivied into the car, toast in one hand, school bag in the other, and we're anything but ready for another glorious day of fun and productivity. Dressed, ready for service. Tom Wright suggests that Jesus' opening words here in this sentence, verse 35, would have taken his Jewish audience right back to the night of the Passover. Sorry, we're doing a bit of a kind of time leap here from Tuesday morning to goodness knows how many years BC. Back to the Passover. Be dressed, ready for service. This was the way the Israelites were to eat the Passover meal, ready to leave their homes in Egypt forever at a moment's notice, prepared to move on at God's instruction. And Jesus continues, perhaps he's kind of pulled on that particular thread for his audience, and he continues and kind of bounces through 3 quick-fire parables, all designed to hammer home the importance of being ready for God's coming. And that word Advent means coming. And as we said recently regarding the parable of the wise and the foolish bridesmaids, it's most likely that Jesus, in the first instance, is talking about the present. He is using parables to explain to his audience that he is the long-awaited Messiah. And like the master in 2 of his stories, he has now arrived and will reward or judge his household according to their faithfulness. Having said that, when it comes to prophecies and parables, time can be a slightly slippery thing. And looking back with the benefit of all of the New Testament writings, we now understand that God's judgment has been largely suspended until the end of the age, as humankind enjoys an era of God's undeserved grace. That's what we're going through now, that time to respond to him. We also understand that Jesus will come again to the earth. The Messiah wasn't just going to come once, but twice. And that will be the moment when everyone is called to account for their lives, their actions, and their faithfulness. And so these parables, although relevant at the time, are also very relevant to us too now, because we await Jesus' return. The common and the key headline in these parables is that the Master, Jesus, is temporarily absent, but his return is a rock-solid certainty, although nobody knows when that's going to happen. So, the critical thing is that we are ready, always ready. A readiness that requires an investment of lifestyle and not a flurry of activity at the last minute. Some of us are last-minute people, aren't we? We can see the deadline coming and we work towards it. Others are very well prepared in advance. I've never been one of those kinds of people. But what Jesus is talking about here is a lifestyle that is prepared. Jesus is coming back. So before we miss that, maybe it's a familiar point if you've been in church for a long, long time. But how does it make you feel? Does it affect the way that you live? Your use of time, your use of resources, use of your gifts? Should it affect us more than it does? Those are all questions that we might kind of chew over, and maybe chew over with others as well during this period of Advent and at other times of the year too. So before we dive into the individual parables, I want to address one element in all of these parables, and that is that actions have consequences. And if we take the thread that runs through the parables, faithful, responsible servants and followers will be rewarded, but unfaithful, irresponsible servants will not. It's not very popular today to have such negative incentives as judgment and punishment. And it can be difficult, I find it difficult, to reconcile these passages with the generous love and grace of God that we read about so frequently in the Bible. I have to remind myself that these are parables that Jesus told. Gentle Jesus, meek and mild, isn't afraid to tell us some hard stuff from time to time. And he told these parables. However, I think it is helpful that we remind ourselves, particularly when we do so often promote and think and talk about God's mercy and grace, which, as we've said, is the That is the theme of this age, this time of opportunity to come to God. But these parables point to that time when that opportunity, the door has closed on that, and we enter into a new time. And we need to be reminded that for us, as members of God's family, that membership has its privileges, but it also has its responsibilities. So while God's love for us is unconditional, if our lives, our actions cause others to stumble or to turn away from God's grace, then that is serious stuff. And so it's so important that we seek his forgiveness, that we turn and walk away from behaviours and habits that are destructive and damaging. And we look to put right those things perhaps in the past where our behaviour has turned other people away or caused difficulties. So let's look at these parables in a little bit more detail, but we're going to go in reverse order. The final scene, verses 42 to 46. The parable here, the story, is a longer period of absence. And Jesus seems to be talking about a higher ranking servant, someone with responsibility. And it speaks of those responsibilities that Jesus gives to all of us to look after his household. It seems very clear, there's specific reference to those who are leaders in the church now, just as they were leaders in the Jewish faith at the time, but leaders in God's church. But it's also a word in season to all Christians. We are all servants of God. We need to be faithful servants. And faithful servants will be rewarded. There is more for us to look after. If we go down a little bit in the passage on the screen, we should be able to see. And the next one as well. I tell you, he'll put him in charge of all his possessions. And of course, the other side of the coin is that the lazy, self-serving servant will be punished, will face disciplinary action in current HR speak. So that's the last of the three parables. Come back to the previous one. The visitor in verse 39 and 40, the visitor to the house now is not the master, but a thief. And this sudden change doesn't sit right with us, does it? Jesus being likened to a thief. What was he talking about? But the point is a very simple one. If we knew when the thief was going to come, we would be wide awake, with the door locked, policemen hiding behind every pot plant, and we would be prepared. Some years ago, I heard a story of a couple who were burgled. And all of their valuable things were taken away from the house. It was a really distressing time. And some months later, they received a letter through the post. I don't know if you can remember letters. This letter was apparently from the burglar. And in it, he confessed and said how sorry he was that he'd burgled their house, and that he asked for their forgiveness. And within the letter, there were a couple of tickets to the theatre as well for a month or two in the future. And the couple were quite touched by this. And the evening came, and they went off to the theatre. And they came back home. You know what happened, don't you? The house had been burgled all over again. All of the stuff that they'd received and that the insurance company had replaced was all gone. Now, they might have guessed, they might have been suspicious of something. But the point of Jesus' story is that nobody knows. You don't know when that burglar is going to come. So again, we need to be prepared all the time. Just as the original homeowner might have thought when that first burglary took place, why didn't I get around to fitting those deadbolts and that burglar alarm and that CCTV system that we talked about? They'll be kicking themselves. Why didn't they prepare better? And so, finally coming to the first of the parables, the master has gone to a wedding banquet. It could well be that this is Luke's version of the parable of the wise and foolish bridesmaids that we looked at a couple of weeks ago. That was in Matthew. It's going to be a long night. We don't know when the master is going to return. But it's the watchman's job in this version of the story to open the courtyard gate the moment the master returns. He doesn't want to be hanging out there in the cold with possible danger lurking in the shadows. So the watchful servant will be rewarded. And in this parable, Jesus says, with a superb meal prepared by the master himself. Now, the first part of that story would be very familiar with Jesus's audience. It was quite common for reasonably wealthy people to employ servants, including gatekeepers. What was absolutely shocking, though, about this parable as he told the story is the reward that the watchful servant receives. The reversal of roles with the master waiting on the slave. This would not happen. This would never happen. Jesus has said something that is so out of their kind of area of understanding that he's grabbed their attention. It would not happen in that society. And we have to get our heads around that fact to comprehend the force of the story. It would be a little bit like King Charles polishing the particularly filthy boots of the stable boy. That's not going to happen either. But it is that very starkness that highlights the reward that awaits the watchful, faithful servants of Jesus. Leaving behind the norms and expectations of the day, Jesus gives us an inspiring glimpse of life in his kingdom. There, the tables will be turned. There, the faithful will be treated like kings, where the king will joyfully serve his people. And in a beautifully inspired prophetic detail that John describes for us later in his gospel, we catch a little glimpse of the Last Supper. I love the fact that you've got these words on the screen. Truly I tell you, he will dress himself to serve. He will have them recline at the table and will come and wait upon them. This is exactly what Jesus did at the Last Supper. And Luke captures it here. John describes it in more detail. Jesus even washing his disciples' feet. Truly, I tell you, he will dress himself to serve, will make them recline at the table and come and wait on them. As we look back over the last term, since September time, we've been looking at Galatians. And week by week, myself and other preachers have been at pains to stress that our salvation is not something we can earn on our own merit. And these parables remind us that as God's people, saved by the death and resurrection of Jesus, there is a resulting requirement that our lives should grow in the grace and love of God, bearing the fruit of the Holy Spirit. Jesus will return in all his glory and power. We don't know when Jesus will return. And in the meantime, he instructs us to live and serve diligently and faithfully, not wasting our gifts, not taking for granted or abusing any position or advantage we may have. Jesus will judge his people based on our faithfulness. Servants who have made no effort to live up to God's values and character will face the consequences of their actions, while faithful servants will be generously rewarded. Let's pray.